The Thalarians had been sending signals for weeks. At first, it was a small, almost desperate pulse, a subtle request whispered into the dark stretches of space. But now, as their homeworld shivered under the weight of its own dying ecosystems, the signals had grown longer, louder, more insistent. Every day, the leaders gathered in the great observation hall, staring at the flickering lights that marked the endless void beyond their atmosphere. They had sent their plea to every corner of the galaxy, reaching countless civilizations, yet nothing had come back. Not a single response. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The Thalarians were a proud species, advanced and cultured, with cities that glowed like silver veins across the surface of their planet. They had traveled far into space before, establishing trade and communication with other civilizations. They knew the galaxy was full of beings just as intelligent, just as curious, just as capable as themselves. And now, with their world crumbling, they felt abandoned. The air in the council chamber was heavy, thick with the weight of fear and hopelessness. Even those who had always stood firm were beginning to falter. Some whispered quietly to each other, wondering if perhaps the galaxy had grown indifferent to their plight. Perhaps other species had priorities that didn't include a world on the brink of extinction. And then, on a day like any other, the unexpected happened. A signal arrived. It was small, simple, not the kind of advanced, ornate transmission they expected from a major civilization. It didn't boast of towering fleets or quantum technologies. It didn't hum with the authority of a species that had conquered stars. Instead, it was humble, curious, determined. It came from a planet called Earth. At first, the Thalarians didn't even recognize it. The pattern of the transmission was unfamiliar, almost primitive, but there was something striking about it, something alive. They decoded the message and read the words carefully, their sensors flicking back and forth over every syllable. Humanity, it seemed, was responding. And unlike the others, they didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't offer conditions or demands. They simply said in their own awkward but earnest way that they wanted to help. The council erupted in debate. Some laughed nervously. How could a species so young, so untested in the galaxy's ways, possibly help a civilization facing extinction? Others argued that they had no choice. Any help was better than none. Every second counted. The environmental disasters on the planet were accelerating. Oceans were turning acidic, forests were collapsing, and storms more violent than anyone had seen before ravaged the lands. Time was slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, across millions of kilometers of space, the humans were preparing for their journey. They had never dealt with anything like this before. Their technology was far less sophisticated than what the Thalarians had assumed a galactic civilization might need. But they had one advantage that no machine or algorithm could replace: creativity. And perhaps even more importantly, they had courage. The humans gathered in a sleek metallic vessel, its surface shimmering with the light of Earth's sun. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly, checking every system, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. They knew this mission could fail in countless ways, but they refused to let fear stop them. Some felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on their shoulders. They were, after all, leaving behind everything familiar: their homes, their families, their world, to reach across the stars and offer help to beings they had never met. The journey was long and exhausting. Time moved differently in the void of space, and every hour felt both endless and fleeting. The humans encountered challenges that tested their patience and ingenuity: minor system failures, communication lags, and the constant psychological strain of isolation. Yet they pressed on, driven by a single thought. Someone out there needed them, and they had to answer. Back on the Thalarian homeworld, the anticipation was unbearable. For centuries, they had measured time in cycles of innovation, growth, and exploration. Now they measured it in days until potential salvation arrived. Every sensor scan, every signal probe was scrutinized. Every faint shadow, every anomaly in the data raised hope or dread. Then finally, a small vessel appeared in the Thalarian sky. It was not massive or imposing. It did not loom with the weight of a military fleet or the authority of centuries of interstellar dominance. It shimmered softly, almost unassumingly, against the backdrop of the dying sun. But to the Thalarians, it was a miracle. The humans stepped out into the alien world carefully, taking in their surroundings with wide eyes and steady hands. The Thalarians watched from above, cautious and skeptical. How could beings so fragile, so small, help a species on the edge of annihilation? Their doubts were strong, but they did not interfere. The humans approached their work with quiet confidence, observing the failing ecosystems, taking readings, and suggesting methods to stabilize the environment. The first days were tense. Cultural misunderstandings arose easily. Humans did things that seemed strange, unconventional, even reckless to the Thalarians. They improvised solutions where the aliens expected rigid procedure. They asked questions the Thalarians hadn't thought to ask themselves, and yet slowly the aliens began to see something remarkable. The humans' approach was different, but it worked. They combined their own knowledge with what they could learn from the Thalarians, often inventing solutions on the spot. They showed resilience in ways the Thalarians had not expected, finding possibilities where others saw only failure. Every small victory, repairing a polluted river, stabilizing a crumbling forest, taming a violent storm, carried more meaning than the Thalarians had realized. It wasn't just the technology, it was the determination, the ingenuity, the refusal to give up that impressed them. At night, when the humans rested, they spoke among themselves quietly, marveling at the beauty and fragility of this alien world. They shared stories from Earth, simple anecdotes of home, of challenges they had overcome, of ordinary lives that now felt extraordinary. They laughed, sometimes nervously, sometimes freely, and in that laughter the Thalarians began to understand something profound. These humans were not just visitors. They were hope made flesh. And so, in the first part of the story, the seeds of an unlikely partnership were planted. A dying world had sent out a desperate plea, ignored by many, but answered by a species the galaxy had underestimated. In humility, determination, and the simple courage to try, humanity had made itself visible in a universe that often overlooked the small and the fragile. The Thalarians had expected advanced fleets and overwhelming technology, but instead they received something that would change them forever: compassion in action. They began to realize that survival was not only about strength or sophistication, it was about will, creativity, and the ability to reach out to another being without asking for anything in return. As the humans worked tirelessly through the day, repairing, analyzing, and learning, the Thalarians could not help but watch with growing admiration. Slowly, the fear that had gripped them for generations began to ease. Perhaps, just perhaps, their world could be saved. Perhaps this strange, unassuming species from a tiny blue planet, so far away in the galaxy, might turn out to be the heroes they had been waiting for. And that was where the story began. A plea sent into the endless void, ignored by most, but answered by a species whose courage and heart would come to define the meaning of hope across the stars. This part is around 1/500 words in simple, natural English, keeping it engaging, human-centric, and suitable for narration or a YouTube story. If you want, I can continue with part 2, keeping the same tone, and show how the humans start interacting with the Thalarians directly, making the story even more engaging. The arrival of the humans stirred a mixture of awe and skepticism among the Thalarians. From high above in their floating observation platforms, the alien leaders watched the small group move with steady purpose across their battered world. The humans looked fragile, even laughably so compared to the tall, elegant Thalarians. But there was something in their determination that the aliens could not ignore. Every step they took seemed deliberate, every action guided by both curiosity and care. The Thalarians gathered in their council chambers to discuss how to approach the humans. Some argued that the humans' lack of advanced technology made them incapable of truly helping. After all, the disasters threatening their world were beyond anything the Thalarians had faced before. But others argued differently. They pointed to the humans' ingenuity, their willingness to travel across the galaxy for the sake of others, and most importantly, their resilience. These humans, it seemed, had an uncommon courage that no machine could replicate. The first contact was cautious. The humans set up simple devices to measure the planet's atmosphere, soil quality, and water composition. They moved slowly, carefully, making sure not to disrupt anything in their environment. The Thalarians observed, curious but careful. This was not the usual procedure for first contact. Normally, other species arrived with fleets, weapons, and technology that could overwhelm an entire planet. The humans had nothing like that. Yet in their simplicity there was genius. The humans did not try to force solutions upon the Thalarians. They asked questions. They learned. They observed the failures and the successes of the Thalirians' own methods, and then built upon them in ways that were unexpected. Sometimes the humans would spend hours tinkering with a device, arguing quietly among themselves, and then suddenly, they would discover a way to stabilize a small part of the ecosystem that had baffled the aliens for decades. The Thalirians began to feel something they had not felt in a long time: hope. The humans' presence alone seemed to shift the energy of the planet. Where there had been fear and desperation, there was now cautious optimism. Even the young Thalirians, who had grown up knowing only a dying world, watched the humans with fascination. They did not fully understand them, but they recognized a quality that transcended species: determination. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the humans began to make tangible changes. Small rivers that had been clogged with pollutants began to flow cleanly once more. Sections of forests that had been collapsing started to show new growth. Even the atmosphere, which had been thick with toxins, began to stabilize in places where the humans focused their efforts. Each success was small, incremental, but each one mattered. The Thalirians could not help but be impressed. These humans were not armed with the kind of weapons or devices that could dominate a civilization, yet they were making a difference in ways that the Thalirians themselves had not imagined. The humans were patient, persistent, and unafraid to take risks when it mattered. When a sudden storm threatened one of the fragile regions the humans were working on, they did not retreat. They improvised tools, coordinated efforts, and even exposed themselves to danger, all to protect the environment they were trying to save. Over time, bonds began to form. It started subtly with small exchanges of knowledge. A Thalirian scientist would demonstrate a method for filtering toxic water, and a human would add a twist that made it faster or more efficient. A human engineer would show a way to stabilize collapsing soil, and the Thalirians would refine it further with their own understanding of the planet. Ideas flowed back and forth like a river, growing stronger with every collaboration. At night, the humans would gather around simple campfires or inside their small shelters, sharing stories about their home. They spoke of Earth, of the oceans, the forests, and the cities where millions of people lived. They talked about how humans faced challenges every day, not always as dramatic as the crises they faced on the Thalirian planet, but challenges that required creativity and courage nonetheless. The Thalirians listened quietly from a distance, fascinated by the idea of a world so full of life, resilience, and diversity. Curiosity led to friendship. The humans began to understand the Thalirians not just as a species in need, but as individuals with their own fears, hopes, and traditions. They asked questions about Thalirian customs, about the stories that shaped their culture, and about the ways they had survived on a world that was once thriving but now on the edge of ruin. In turn, the Thalirians began to see the humans not as primitive visitors but as partners, allies, and even friends. There were challenges, of course. The Thalirians were skeptical of the humans' methods at times. Some humans would take risks that seemed reckless from an alien perspective. Others made mistakes that caused small setbacks. But every error was met with reflection and adaptation, not defeat. The humans were relentless learners, constantly adjusting, experimenting, and improving. And in that persistence, the Thalirians found a lesson they had forgotten: that survival was not just about strength, but about ingenuity, resilience, and the willingness to act even when the odds seemed impossible. Slowly, the humans began to integrate themselves into the fabric of the planet. They climbed mountains to test soil samples, waded into rivers to measure currents, and even entered dense forests to study plant life firsthand. They were unafraid of the planet's dangers, approaching each obstacle with a combination of careful planning and bold improvisation. They were not superheroes. They were humans with limits, fears, and doubts. And yet their humanity, their ability to care, to persist, and to adapt, was the most powerful tool they had. The Thalirians, watching this unfold, began to question their assumptions about other species. They had expected advanced civilizations to bring overwhelming technology and cold precision, yet it was these humans, with their imperfections and their persistence, who were making a real difference. The aliens realized that perhaps the galaxy had underestimated humanity, because humans relied on heart and ingenuity more than raw power. And now, That same underestimated species had arrived to save a world that many thought was doomed. Tension and hope existed side by side. Some Thalirians still doubted the humans' abilities, fearing that the mission would ultimately fail. But every small success, the revival of a river, the regrowth of a forest, the protection of a fragile species, was proof that hope was possible. And with every success, the humans' presence became less of a curiosity and more of a necessity. At the end of the first week, the humans had stabilized several critical areas of the planet. They were exhausted physically and emotionally, but there was a quiet satisfaction in their achievements. They spoke among themselves about the next steps, about the challenges that awaited, and about the importance of staying patient, focused, and adaptable. They did not underestimate the planet's fragility, but neither did they give in to fear. They had learned through experience that progress was made one step at a time. The Thalirians observed silently, amazed at what they were seeing. They had grown accustomed to thinking of survival in terms of power, dominance, and control. Yet these humans, small and seemingly fragile, were teaching them a different lesson, that life could be preserved through intelligence, cooperation, and courage. Even the most advanced technology could not replace the value of determination, quick thinking, and the willingness to act without expecting reward. By the end of Part 2, the Thalirians began to trust the humans. They no longer saw them as mere visitors or oddities. They were partners in a mission that was bigger than any one species. The humans' compassion, ingenuity, and courage had begun to reshape not only the planet, but the hearts and minds of its inhabitants. A partnership that had started as a cautious experiment was slowly transforming into a profound collaboration, a hope that might just save a world. The stage was set for the next phase of the story. The humans had proven themselves capable of extraordinary things, but the planet still faced countless dangers. Storms could surge, lands could collapse, and ecosystems could fail again at any moment. The Thalirians now understood that their survival depended not just on technology, but on working alongside these remarkable humans who had come across the galaxy for no reason other than to help. And so, with trust forming and hope taking root, the Thalirians and humans prepared to face the next challenge together. The first contact had succeeded beyond expectations, and the journey toward healing a dying world had only just begun. The humans had been on the Thalirian planet for several weeks now. By this point, the Thalirians had begun to trust them more, but that trust was still cautious. The planet's problems were deeper and more complex than anyone had anticipated. The humans quickly realized that small fixes, while helpful, would not be enough. To make a real difference, they needed to understand the planet's systems on a larger scale. How the atmosphere, the oceans, the forests, and the wildlife all connected. The humans divided their efforts, each taking on a specific task. Some worked on the atmosphere, analyzing the chemical imbalances and finding ways to filter the toxic air. Others focused on water systems, devising methods to clean rivers and stabilize lakes that were on the brink of collapse. A few ventured into forests, carefully planting and tending to seedlings, trying to restore what had been lost. What set the humans apart was how they approached these challenges. They did not rely on brute force or overwhelming technology. Instead, they observed carefully, experimented, and adapted quickly. If one approach failed, they learned from it and tried something new. They asked questions constantly, not just of each other, but of the Thalirians who had spent their lives on this planet. Every bit of local knowledge was absorbed, studied, and improved upon. The Thalirians watched in amazement. They had grown accustomed to thinking that survival required the best technology or the most advanced machines. Yet these humans, with their simple tools and relentless curiosity, were achieving results that the aliens had not managed in decades. They worked long hours, often under harsh conditions, yet their energy never seemed to falter. When a sudden storm threatened one of the water purification stations, the humans worked together, improvising barriers and redirecting flow, ensuring no damage occurred. But it was not all success. The planet had been pushed too far and some areas were beyond immediate repair. The humans faced setbacks that would have crushed lesser beings. Crops they planted wilted under the harsh climate. Rivers they tried to cleanse became clogged again with sediment, and storms damaged their carefully constructed equipment. Each failure was a test of their patience and creativity. Yet rather than giving up, the humans analyzed what went wrong. discussed solutions, and tried again. Every mistake became a lesson. Through this process, a subtle bond formed between the humans and the Thalarians. At first, the aliens observed from a distance, wary of their methods. Gradually, they began to offer suggestions, share knowledge, and even participate in the work directly. The humans, in turn, treated the Thalarians as equals, respecting their culture, their knowledge, and their experience. There was no condescension, no sense of superiority, just cooperation. The human approach was not only effective but contagious. Young Thalarians who had grown up believing that the planet was beyond saving began to show renewed interest in their environment. They joined the humans, learning hands-on how to repair damaged areas, monitor ecosystems, and nurture life back to health. The presence of humans inspired them to think differently, to experiment, and to hope. Communication was a challenge at first. The humans and Thalarians spoke very differently, and gestures or body language often caused confusion. But over time, they developed a system of signs, shared language patterns, and simple codes that allowed them to work seamlessly. It was not perfect, but it worked, and it built trust. When humans asked for advice, Thalarians provided it openly. And when Thalarians suggested a method, humans tried it without hesitation. Together, they became a team greater than the sum of its parts. One of the most critical challenges came when the humans noticed that the planet's largest ocean was deteriorating rapidly. Toxic runoff from decayed lands and collapsing forests had poisoned large sections, threatening the entire ecosystem. The humans worked day and night, studying water currents, testing filtration methods, and creating temporary barriers to prevent further spread of contamination. It was exhausting work, physically demanding and mentally draining, but they never gave up. The Thalarians, who had spent their lives observing the oceans, were astounded by the humans' persistence and ingenuity. They had assumed no simple methods could reverse the damage, but humans used a combination of creativity, science, and improvisation to make progress. Slowly, the water began to clear, fish populations rebounded, and coastal ecosystems showed signs of recovery. The Thalarians realized that humans had something they themselves had almost forgotten: the ability to face impossible odds without surrendering to despair. At the same time, the humans continued to teach the Thalarians as much as they learned from them. They shared simple but effective methods for preserving soil, preventing erosion, and even planting new crops adapted to harsh climates. They encouraged the Thalarians to experiment, to question old assumptions, and to try unconventional solutions. The result was a blend of human ingenuity and Thalarian knowledge that created progress at a pace that neither species had expected. As the work continued, the humans never forgot the bigger picture. They were not just repairing damaged areas, they were restoring balance. They understood that every tree, every river, every patch of soil was connected. If one part of the ecosystem failed, it affected everything else. This holistic approach impressed the Thalarians, who had often focused on isolated problems rather than seeing the planet as a living system. Despite exhaustion and occasional setbacks, the humans maintained their optimism. They encouraged each other and the Thalarians, celebrating small victories and keeping spirits high when failures came. Their energy and determination became infectious. Even the oldest Thalarians, those who had lived through decades of despair, found themselves inspired by the humans' resilience. One day, as a group of humans worked to stabilize a collapsing mountain ridge, a sudden tremor shook the ground. Loose rocks tumbled and a landslide threatened to wipe out a vital water channel. Panic might have set in for most beings, but not for these humans. They coordinated quickly, forming human chains, using ropes and temporary supports to redirect the flow and stabilize the ridge. By the end of the day, the channel was secure, and no one was hurt. The Thalarians, who had watched in disbelief, finally understood the depth of human courage and quick thinking. Through these trials, the humans demonstrated that survival was not just about tools or intelligence, but about collaboration, resilience, and heart. The Thalarians had thought they understood these concepts, but the humans showed them what they truly meant. Every challenge, every risk, and every small success taught the aliens a lesson in perseverance that would stay with them forever. Even as they worked tirelessly, the humans found time for simple moments of reflection. They shared stories about Earth, about the struggles of ordinary people, about times when their own planet had faced crises. They laughed together, joked, and comforted each other when the weight of the work became overwhelming. The Thalarians noticed these moments, realizing that humans' emotional strength, compassion, hope, and empathy was just as important as their technical skills. By the end of this period, several critical regions of the planet were stabilized. Forests showed signs of regrowth, rivers and lakes were cleaner, and local species began to thrive once again. The Thalarians could hardly believe the transformation. It was not complete, not yet, but progress was undeniable. They had witnessed a species, so young in galactic terms, achieve what centuries of their own technology could not. The humans, exhausted but satisfied, knew their work was far from finished. The planet still faced many challenges, from unstable weather systems to the fragile balance of entire ecosystems, but they were determined to continue, understanding that change came one step at a time, and that persistence often mattered more than immediate results. At the same time, the Thalarians began to see themselves differently. They realized that survival was not just about relying on their own power and knowledge, but about being willing to accept help, to learn from others, and to work together toward a common goal. In the humans, they had discovered an unexpected teacher, one that would change their understanding of life, hope, and possibility forever. And so, by the end of Part 3, a pattern had emerged. Humans and Thalarians worked side by side, facing enormous challenges with courage and creativity. Each small success built confidence, each setback built resilience, and together, the two species were learning that even the most broken world could be restored through cooperation, ingenuity, and unyielding determination. The journey was far from over. Greater challenges lay ahead, dangers that would test the limits of both species. But the foundation had been laid. Trust had been earned, bonds had been formed, and hope had been renewed. The humans had proven that courage and compassion, combined with intelligence and creativity, could achieve extraordinary things. The Thalarians now looked forward with cautious optimism, ready to face the next phase of their planet's recovery. They had sent a plea to the galaxy, and humanity had answered, not with overwhelming force, not with arrogance, but with heart, ingenuity, and relentless determination. And for the first time in generations, the Thalarians felt something they had thought lost forever: hope. The planet's recovery had begun, but the challenges were far from over. The humans and Thalarians now faced the more difficult, unpredictable threats, those that no one had anticipated, and that could undo all their progress in a single day. The humans quickly realized that helping a world wasn't just about fixing what was broken. It was about understanding it deeply, learning its rhythms, and working with it rather than against it. One of the first major challenges came from the planet's unpredictable weather. Violent storms erupted without warning, tearing through forests and flooding rivers. The Thalarians had grown used to these storms over the centuries, but now, with the ecosystems weakened, their impact was far worse. Homes, plants, and even newly restored habitats were at risk. The humans didn't have powerful machines to control the weather, but they had something equally important: strategy and teamwork. They divided into teams, each responsible for a specific region. They reinforced riverbanks, built temporary shelters for wildlife, and created early warning systems using sensors and simple structures. Humans worked in shifts, enduring heavy rain, strong winds, and cold nights. They encouraged each other constantly, reminding themselves and the Thalarians that even small actions could prevent disaster. Every tree they secured, every slope they reinforced was a step toward safety. The Thalarians watched, amazed at how humans remained calm under pressure. The aliens had grown accustomed to relying on strength, technology, or strict procedures. The humans relied on observation, creativity, and quick decision-making. When a massive storm struck one of the weaker forested areas, the humans did not panic. They used ropes and pulleys to secure the oldest trees, created channels to redirect water, and ensured that young plants were protected. By the end of the storm, most of the damage had been minimized and life had survived. The Thalarians could hardly believe what they had witnessed. Another challenge came from the wildlife. Some animals had grown aggressive due to starvation and habitat loss, while others wandered into human-populated areas in search of food. Humans approached the situation with patience and care. They didn't try to control or dominate the animals. Instead, they observed their behavior, learned their patterns, and created solutions that allowed both humans and Thalarians to work safely while the animals found their way back to healthier habitats. They set up feeding stations, created safe corridors, and even relocated certain species temporarily. Every action was carefully considered to ensure balance. Through these efforts, the Thalarians began to see the humans not just as helpers, but as problem solvers who thought beyond the obvious. Humans didn't rely solely on technology. They relied on thinking, on understanding cause and effect, and on making decisions with both logic and empathy. Even when the planet seemed determined to resist them, humans adapted, trying multiple approaches until something worked. One day, a human engineer noticed that one of the main rivers, which supplied water to a large portion of the planet, was being blocked by debris from a landslide. The blockage threatened to flood nearby areas and destroy habitats. The Thalarians had been struggling to remove it using their heavy machinery, but the humans suggested an alternative approach. Working together, they designed a system of channels and levers that allowed water to flow safely around the debris, while gradually clearing the blockage. It took days of effort, careful coordination, and constant monitoring, but by the end the river flowed freely again. The Thalarians were in awe. They had relied on brute force and machines for decades, but the humans had solved a complex problem with ingenuity, patience, and teamwork. More importantly, they had done it without causing harm to the environment or the creatures that lived there. The lesson was clear. Power alone was not enough. Intelligence combined with care could achieve far more. As the humans continued their work, they faced another obstacle: disease. Certain areas of the planet, weakened by environmental collapse, had become breeding grounds for harmful bacteria and parasites. The Thalarians had treatments, but they were not effective enough. The humans studied the problem carefully, developing simple but effective methods to purify water, improve hygiene, and protect both the Thalarians and the wildlife. They also taught the Thalarians how to monitor conditions and prevent future outbreaks. During this time, bonds between the two species deepened. Humans and Thalarians learned from one another, laughed together when small mistakes happened, and encouraged each other when progress seemed slow. They shared stories of their worlds, their challenges, and their hopes. The humans spoke of Earth, of rivers and forests and oceans, and how people there often face their own environmental crises. The Thalarians shared tales of their planet's history, of cities that once thrived and species that had disappeared. These exchanges created trust and friendship, turning cooperation into partnership. The humans also introduced new ways of thinking to the Thalarians. They emphasized observation and experimentation over rigid procedure. They encouraged small teams to test ideas quickly, learn from failure, and adapt. The Thalarians, who had long followed tradition and strict protocols, began to see the value in flexibility and creativity. The humans' approach reminded them that intelligence alone was not enough. It had to be paired with courage, resilience, and empathy. One of the most striking examples came when a massive wildfire broke out in a previously restored forest. The Thalarians had struggled with controlling fires for generations, often relying on natural barriers and primitive suppression methods. The humans, however, approached the fire with careful planning. They created controlled burns to redirect the fire, used fire breaks to protect critical areas, and coordinated teams to monitor the spread. It was dangerous work and at times terrifying, yet the humans remained focused and calm. By the time the fire burned itself out, most of the forest had survived, and the lessons learned allowed them to prevent future disasters more effectively. The Thalarians were beginning to understand something profound. Humans were not the strongest or the most technologically advanced, but they possessed qualities that were equally powerful: determination, creativity, empathy, and the ability to inspire others. Where the Thalarians had relied on structure and hierarchy, the humans relied on collaboration and thinking on their feet. Where the Thalarians had feared failure, the humans treated it as an opportunity to learn and improve. The planet itself began to respond to the combined efforts of both species. Forests became denser, rivers cleaner, and the atmosphere slowly stabilized in certain regions. Wildlife returned to areas that had been abandoned for years. The Thalarians, who had grown accustomed to seeing their world decay, were stunned by the changes. It was not just the humans' work. It was the humans' approach, their determination and ingenuity that made the difference. Despite progress, the work was exhausting. Humans and Thalarians alike felt the toll of long days, challenging conditions, and constant problem-solving. Yet the humans never complained. They motivated one another, shared tasks, and even found time for small moments of rest and laughter. Their morale remained high, even in the face of setbacks, and that energy inspired the Thalarians to push further than they ever had before. By the end of this period, the planet had begun to feel alive again. It was not yet fully healed, but the recovery was undeniable. The humans had not only repaired parts of the environment, they had changed the way the Thalarians saw themselves and their world. The aliens realized that survival was not about waiting for a perfect solution or relying solely on technology. It was about creativity, courage, persistence, and the willingness to act even when the odds seemed impossible. And so, by the end of Part 4, the humans and Thalarians had become true partners. They faced enormous challenges together, from storms and wildfires to floods and disease. Each problem tested their skill, their patience, and their courage, but each success reinforced their bond and renewed hope for the planet's future. The stage was set for even greater challenges ahead. The planet was recovering, but not without threats. Environmental systems remained fragile, and there were still unknown dangers lurking in the forests, oceans, and skies. Yet the humans and Thalarians had learned to work together, combining creativity, knowledge, and empathy to overcome obstacles. The bond between the two species was strong, and their collaboration was now the planet's greatest hope. For the first time in generations, the Thalarians looked at their world with cautious optimism. They had survived for centuries, but now, with the humans' help, they felt capable of more than just survival. They felt capable of restoration, of rebuilding, and of hope. Humanity had answered their plea, not with overwhelming force, but with determination, ingenuity, and heart. And in doing so, they had shown that even a fragile, distant species could make a difference where it mattered most. By now, the humans and Thalarians had formed a strong partnership. Weeks of hard work, problem-solving, and shared experiences had created trust and respect between the two species. The planet, once teetering on the edge of collapse, had begun to show real signs of recovery. Forests were returning to their former density. Rivers ran cleaner than they had in decades, and wildlife, cautious at first, started reclaiming territories they had abandoned. But the humans knew better than to believe that the work was finished. Recovery was not a single act. It was a long, ongoing process, and the planet was still fragile. One morning, the humans noticed unusual activity along one of the largest rivers. The water level was rising quickly, faster than the usual seasonal patterns. Upon closer inspection, they discovered that a glacier high in the mountains had begun to collapse due to accelerated melting. If the glacier broke completely, it would send an enormous surge of water downstream, wiping out newly restored areas, drowning habitats, and threatening human and Thalarian workers alike. The humans immediately gathered with the Thalarians to plan a response. While the Thalarians had studied glaciers and weather patterns for centuries, they had never faced such a rapid and unpredictable disaster. The humans, with their creativity and problem-solving skills, suggested a plan that relied not on brute force but on careful observation and coordination. They proposed building temporary barriers to redirect the water, while also creating controlled channels to gradually release the surge. It was dangerous work. The humans had to climb icy cliffs, place supports along the melting glacier, and monitor constantly for shifts that could trigger a catastrophic collapse. Thalarians assisted with knowledge and technology, but the humans were the ones taking the most direct risks. They coordinated their teams meticulously, working in shifts, communicating constantly through both verbal and visual signals. Even in the face of danger, the humans remained calm. Their courage inspired the Thalarians, who watched in amazement as the humans worked tirelessly in conditions that would have caused panic or hesitation in most beings. When a section of ice broke away suddenly, threatening to destroy the barriers, the humans adapted quickly, adjusting their strategy, reinforcing weak points, and ensuring that the water flow remained controlled. Their quick thinking prevented what could have been a disaster. As the days passed, the humans continued to monitor the glacier and downstream areas, making adjustments as needed. They also organized local Thalarians to assist in evacuating vulnerable areas, protecting wildlife, and reinforcing critical habitats. The Thalarians marveled at how humans could combine technical knowledge with empathy. While they focused on solving the immediate problem, they never lost sight of the living beings that relied on the planet's stability. Meanwhile, The humans also encouraged the Thalirians to innovate. They suggested new methods for reinforcing riverbanks using local materials, creating water channels that mimicked natural paths, and restoring plant life along the edges to prevent erosion. The Thalirians, who had long relied on established procedures, were initially hesitant, but they quickly saw the effectiveness of the humans' approach. Together, the two species developed strategies that neither could have imagined alone. Despite the intense work, humans maintained their morale. They shared stories and humor during breaks, reminding themselves and the Thalirians why their work mattered. They spoke of Earth's rivers and mountains, of the challenges humans had faced at home and how persistence and cooperation had always been the key to overcoming difficulties. The Thalirians began to see that human strength was not measured by size or technology, but by determination, creativity, and the ability to inspire others. The climax of the crisis came when a massive chunk of the glacier shifted unexpectedly. The humans had anticipated such a possibility and had prepared contingency plans, but nothing could fully eliminate risk. They worked together, coordinating efforts across multiple teams, using every tool, observation, and skill at their disposal. They moved with precision, guided by experience, intuition, and constant communication. Every second counted, and the outcome depended on their ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. Finally, after hours of relentless effort, the surge was controlled. The glacier stabilized temporarily, the river flowed safely, and the areas downstream were protected. There were no casualties, no major damage, and the humans and Thalirians celebrated this victory together. It was a turning point. The planet had faced a near-catastrophic event, and yet, through courage, ingenuity, and cooperation, disaster had been averted. The Thalirians were profoundly moved. They had expected survival to depend on advanced technology, but the humans had shown them a different kind of power, one that came from empathy, creativity, and teamwork. They realized that true heroism was not about strength or dominance. It was about persistence, problem-solving, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. In the days following the glacier crisis, the humans focused on long-term stabilization. They worked on replanting forests along the riverbanks, reinforcing natural barriers, and monitoring wildlife populations. They also trained Thalirians in techniques that emphasized flexibility, observation, and adaptation. The goal was not just to save the planet temporarily, but to equip the Thalirians to manage their ecosystems independently in the future. Through this collaboration, the Thalirians began to see themselves differently. They realized that they had been too focused on tradition, on strict procedures, and on waiting for perfect solutions. The humans taught them that innovation, experimentation, and persistence were equally important. The aliens began to adopt a more flexible mindset, learning to adjust quickly when conditions changed, and to embrace small successes as steps toward greater recovery. Meanwhile, the humans continued to inspire through simple acts of kindness and care. They treated Thalirians as equals, respected their culture, and encouraged participation rather than dictating solutions. They also showed empathy toward wildlife, rescuing injured animals, creating safe corridors, and ensuring that every action considered the well-being of living creatures. The Thalirians had never seen such care and attention extended so consistently across all aspects of work. As the planet slowly stabilized, small celebrations became more frequent. Humans and Thalirians shared moments of laughter, exchanged stories, and reflected on the progress they had made together. They talked about how far they had come and how much farther they could go. These moments were more than morale boosters. They reinforced the sense of partnership, trust, and shared purpose that had developed over weeks of hard work. The humans' presence had transformed the Thalirians' perception of their world. What had once seemed like a dying, hopeless planet now showed potential for revival. Forests could grow again, rivers could flow freely, and wildlife could thrive. The Thalirians began to see their planet not as a lost cause but as a living system that could be healed with patience, knowledge, and cooperation. By the end of Part 5, the humans and Thalirians had faced one of the greatest crises the planet had experienced in decades. They had worked tirelessly, adapted to changing conditions, and demonstrated courage, intelligence, and empathy. The planet itself was responding to their efforts, showing signs of renewal, and the bond between the two species had never been stronger. The stage was now set for the final phase of recovery. The humans had proven that even a distant, underestimated species could make a monumental difference. The Thalarians had learned the value of collaboration, flexibility, and persistence. And the planet, once on the brink of collapse, had begun to thrive again, ready to face the future with hope and resilience. The story was no longer just about survival. It was about transformation, unity, and the extraordinary impact of courage and compassion. Humanity had answered the plea of a dying world, and in doing so had changed the course of history for an entire species. The lessons learned, the bonds formed, and the successes achieved would resonate for generations, proving that even the smallest actions, when guided by heart and determination, could alter the fate of a world. The planet, once teetering on the edge of collapse, now breathed with cautious life. Forests stretched green and dense, rivers flowed with renewed vigor, and wildlife returned to habitats that had been abandoned for decades. The skies, once choked with dust and pollution, began to clear, revealing distant stars in a way the Thalarians had not seen in generations. It was a transformation that no one could have imagined would be possible so quickly. Yet here it was, and at the center of it all stood the humans whose courage, creativity, and perseverance had made this rebirth possible. The Thalarians held a gathering to mark the moment, not as a simple ceremony, but as a recognition of what had been achieved together. Leaders, scientists, and citizens came together, filling a massive open space where the air was now fresh enough to breathe comfortably. There was a sense of wonder, of disbelief even, as they looked at what had been restored. Every tree, every river, every living creature was a testament to the weeks of tireless work, dedication, and partnership. The humans were invited to the center of this gathering. They stood quietly, observing the assembled Thalarians, feeling the weight of what they had accomplished, but also the humility of being guests in a world not their own. They had never expected praise, yet the Thalarians' gratitude was palpable. Leaders spoke of the courage humans had shown, of the ways they had thought differently, acted bravely, and inspired an entire species to believe in the possibility of change. It was not just a matter of survival anymore. It was a matter of understanding. The Thalarians realized that humanity had taught them lessons that extended beyond environmental recovery. The humans had shown them the value of persistence in the face of failure, of creativity when standard solutions faltered, and of empathy when dealing with the delicate balance of life. They had proven that strength was not measured by size, technology, or power, but by the courage to act and the willingness to work together for a greater good. As the gathering continued, some Thalarians approached the humans directly. They asked questions about Earth, about how humans faced challenges on their own planet, and how they had learned to cooperate under pressure. The humans spoke openly, describing their struggles with natural disasters, climate crises, and social challenges on Earth. They told of small communities banding together to repair rivers, replant forests, or rebuild towns after storms. The Thalarians listened with fascination, realizing that these small acts of resilience had prepared humanity for the monumental task they had faced here. Children, curious and wide-eyed, approached the humans, asking questions about their lives, their families, and the strange planet they had traveled from. The humans answered patiently, showing kindness and respect. They shared simple stories about Earth's forests, rivers, and mountains, about the ordinary people who persevered through hardship, and about the belief that small actions could lead to extraordinary results. The Thalarians began to understand that heroism was not always about grand feats. It was about persistence, compassion, and courage. Meanwhile, the humans worked with the Thalarians to establish long-term plans for maintaining the planet's health. They developed systems for monitoring rivers, forests, and wildlife populations. They taught sustainable methods for farming, reforestation, and water management. Most importantly, they emphasized the value of observation and adaptation, encouraging the Thalarians to continue experimenting, learning, and improving even after the humans returned to their own world. The Thalarians were quick learners. They began to implement what the humans had taught them, observing carefully, analyzing outcomes, and making adjustments. There was a newfound energy among the alien population. Where there had once been fear and despair, there was hope and initiative. Communities took ownership of their regions, motivated by what they had seen the humans accomplish. They understood now that survival and restoration were not just the work of a few leaders or scientists, but the responsibility of everyone acting with care and determination. Over time, The humans became a part of the planet's rhythms. They moved seamlessly alongside the Thalirians, whether tending to forests, stabilizing rivers, or protecting wildlife. Even when disasters struck, whether minor floods or small landslides, humans and Thalirians responded together. There was no fear, only action, cooperation, and trust in one another. The Thalirians had learned to look at problems not as obstacles but as opportunities to test ingenuity, courage, and resilience. One particularly striking moment came when a young Thalirian suggested a new method for reforesting a barren hillside. The humans encouraged experimentation, allowing the Thalirians to implement their idea. Within weeks, the hillside began to show new growth, and the Thalirians realized that innovation was not limited to any one species. The humans had taught them how to think creatively, and now the Thalirians themselves were applying that lesson with remarkable success. The humans also focused on fostering a culture of hope. They organized small activities that celebrated progress, tree planting ceremonies, river cleaning events, and wildlife observation days. These activities weren't just practical, they were symbolic, reinforcing the idea that the planet could be healed and that every living being mattered. The Thalirians began to carry this mindset forward, teaching it to younger generations and ensuring that the values of care, creativity, and persistence became part of their society. As the weeks turned into months, the planet transformed in ways that exceeded expectations. Forests stretched uninterrupted across vast regions. Rivers teemed with fish and wildlife roamed freely. The air was cleaner, the skies clearer, and even the climate stabilized in areas that had once been prone to violent storms. The Thalirians could finally walk through their world without fear of collapse, witnessing a balance returning to their ecosystems. Yet beyond the environmental recovery, the humans had achieved something even more profound. They had changed the Thalirians' perspective on life. The aliens realized that survival was not just about technology or control. It was about empathy, courage, and collaboration. It was about understanding the needs of others, learning from failure, and acting even when the odds seemed impossible. Humanity's example had become a model of hope, demonstrating that even the most fragile or underestimated species could make a monumental difference. The final day of the humans' mission approached. They had accomplished far more than anyone could have expected, but they knew it was time to return home. The Thalirians, though saddened, understood the necessity. The humans' presence had left an indelible mark on the planet and its people, ensuring that progress would continue long after they were gone. A farewell ceremony was held, not with pomp or grandeur, but with heartfelt gratitude. The Thalirians expressed thanks not only for the humans' efforts but also for the lessons they had taught: resilience, creativity, empathy, and hope. Children offered simple gifts made from local materials, elders shared stories of lessons learned, and leaders spoke of the humans' courage. The humans, in turn, expressed admiration for the Thalirians' dedication, knowledge, and willingness to learn. There was no need for grand speeches. Everyone present understood the magnitude of what had been achieved together. As the humans prepared to leave, they reflected on their journey. They had traveled across the galaxy to answer a plea for help, not knowing what they would find, and yet they had been able to save a world. They had faced dangers, uncertainty, and immense challenges, but their determination, cooperation, and ingenuity had carried them through. And in doing so, they had not only restored a planet, they had forged friendships, inspired hope, and demonstrated the extraordinary potential of humanity. The Thalirians watched as the humans departed, their vessel lifting smoothly into the sky. Though the humans would no longer walk among them, their presence was felt in every restored river, every thriving forest, and every living creature that had returned to balance. The aliens knew that this was more than a simple recovery. It was a transformation. They had learned that even when hope seemed lost, courage and cooperation could change the course of history. In the days that followed, the Thalirians continued to implement the lessons the humans had taught them. Communities worked together, ecosystems were monitored and cared for, and a new culture of innovation, resilience, and empathy took root. The planet was no longer on the brink of collapse. It was alive, vibrant, and full of potential. And somewhere in the stars, humans traveled back to their homeworld, carrying stories of courage, determination, and the remarkable beings they had helped. They had answered a plea from the galaxy, and in doing so, They had changed not only the course of a planet but also the understanding of what a species could achieve when guided by heart, intelligence, and perseverance. The story of humanity's mission would be remembered by the Thalirians for generations, not as a tale of distant heroes, but as a lesson in hope, courage, and the power of working together. It proved that even in the darkest times, when a world seems beyond saving, a determined heart and a willing hand could create miracles. The planet, once silenced by despair, now sang with life. Rivers flowed, forests stretched, wildlife thrived, and the sky above sparkled with renewed clarity. And in every corner, the spirit of cooperation between humans and Thalirians shone brightly,